Have you ever had that moment where you realize like a file you've been working on might be gone,
Oh, yeah.
or your entire system crashed and you didn't back things up?
It's a sinking feeling.
It really is.
Yeah,
You know, for so many of us, our digital lives are everything, and losing that data can be anything from a minor annoyance to a complete business shutdown.
totally.
So how do we build a plan to make sure our digital world is safe and sound?
That's a great question, and it's what we're going to be tackling in this deep dive. We're going to be going over Azure backup policies. It's a step-by-step guide to making sure that your data is protected and you can recover it if something bad does happen.
Exactly. And we have a great resource to help us with that.
Yeah.
We have a presentation here by Manuel Seist, and it covers all the essentials for creating a really solid backup strategy in Azure.
Sounds good.
So the goal today is to really break this down for you and make sure you come away knowing how to use Azure Backup to safeguard your data and make sure that your business can keep going no matter what. All right, so let's dive right in. What do you say we start with slide 1?
Yeah, let's go to slide 1.
All right, slide 1, Azure Backup Policies. So this first slide, it really kind of sets the stage and emphasizes the importance of setting up a backup policy in Azure Resource Management.
Yeah.
It's not just a good idea, it's really essential for keeping your data available and making sure that it's not corrupted or lost. And it also gives us kind of an outline of what we're going to cover today.
Right.
We're going to talk about why these policies are important, the key things you need to include in them, and the steps for setting them up. And we'll also go over some best practices that can help you along the way.
I think what really stands out to me here is this idea of data integrity and availability.
Yeah.
It's not just enough to have a copy of your data somewhere.
Right.
That copy has to be usable, and it's got to be accessible exactly when you need it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's like, what's the point of having a backup if you can't even use it?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's move on to slide 2, the importance of backup policies. I mean, it might seem obvious, but why are these policies so important?
Slide 2 breaks it down into 3 main points. First, you have business continuity. So imagine like your most important business process just grinds to a halt because you lost some data.
Oh, yeah, I don't even want to think about that.
It could be a nightmare. A good backup policy is like your insurance policy and makes sure that you can restore that data and get back to work as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's about keeping things running.
Exactly. And then the second big thing is risk mitigation. This covers a whole bunch of potential threats to your data, like hardware failures, cyber attacks, and just plain old human error. Backups are essential for protecting against those risks. They dramatically reduce the chance of losing your data forever.
That's so important, especially now that cyber attacks are becoming so common.
Yeah, for sure. And then the third reason is compliance. Depending on your industry, you might have some really strict rules about data protection and how long you need to keep backups. Having a good backup policy in place can help you meet those requirements and avoid getting hit with penalties.
So it's not just about protecting yourself, it's about following the rules too.
Okay, let's move on to slide 3, Azure Backup, a scalable solution. What do we got here?
So slide 3 really digs into the specifics of Azure Backup and why it's such a great choice.
Okay.
First of all, it's super versatile. It can protect a whole range of Azure resources like virtual machines, SQL databases, and file shares. You don't need to have different backup solutions for each thing.
That's nice having it all in one place.
Yeah. And then also has some great features like automatic backups, you don't have to do it manually, data encryption to keep your information safe, and options to keep backups for a really long time.
Yeah, automation is huge. It saves so much time and you're less likely to make a mistake. Totally. And if you look at the benefits section, you can see that Azure Backup can actually replace those expensive and complicated on-premises backup systems.
Oh, wow. So you can actually save money by switching to Azure Backup.
Yeah, a lot of times. And the other big benefit is that it works seamlessly with other Azure services. Your backups are stored securely, and the recovery process is super smooth because it's all connected.
That makes sense. It's not just about the backup itself. It's about how well it fits in with your whole cloud setup. Okay, let's go to slide 4, key components of a backup policy. What are the essentials here?
All right, so slide 4 tells us that there are 3 main parts to a good backup policy.
Okay.
First, you have recovery objectives. This basically means figuring out how much downtime your business can handle and how much data loss you can tolerate. There are 2 metrics here, RTO and RPO.
RTO on RPO.
Yeah, RTO is recovery time objective. That's the maximum time you could be without your data before it starts causing serious problems.
So if your website went down, how long could you go before you started losing customers?
Exactly. And then RPO is recovery point objective. That's the maximum amount of data you're willing to lose. Let's say your RPO is 24 hours. That means in a worst-case scenario, you might lose up to a day's worth of data.
Those are some pretty big decisions. It's not just about the technology, it's about how downtime and data loss would actually affect your business.
Yeah, for sure. You really need to think about those things from a business perspective. The second part is the retention policy. This is how long you're going to keep your backups before getting rid of them.
Okay.
You might need to keep them for a certain amount of time to comply with regulations, or maybe you just want to be able to restore data from different points in time.
So you might need that old data sometime in the future.
Right. And then the third part is the backup schedule. This is where you decide how often backups will run and when they'll happen. You need to find a balance between making sure you have frequent backups to minimize data loss, but also not using up too many resources or driving up your costs.
So it's like finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. And the slide points out that all three of these components, they all need to work together to create a backup strategy that's both effective and affordable.
It's like a puzzle, all the pieces have to fit.
Okay, let's move on to slide 5. Creating a backup policy in Azure. This is where we get into the how-to write.
Yeah, so slide 5 gives us a basic overview of the process.
Okay.
The first thing you do is go to the Azure portal and pick the resource that you want to protect.
So that could be a virtual machine or a database or something like that.
Right. Then you configure your backup settings. This is where you'll set things like your backup schedule and your retention policy. The next slide will get into more detail about that.
All right.
And then finally, you apply the policy. You can either use one of the predefined policies that Azure has, or you can create your own custom policy.
Oh, that's nice. So you have some flexibility there.
Yeah, and custom policies are especially useful if you need to manage backups for a bunch of resources that all have the same requirements.
So you can set it up once and apply it to everything.
Exactly. That's great. All right, let's go to slide 6, configuring backup schedule and retention. Let's get into the specifics here.
Okay, so on slide 6, we can see that when you're setting your backup schedule, you can choose to do backups daily, weekly, or monthly.
Okay.
And you can pick the exact time of day when you want them to run. And one really cool thing is that Azure uses incremental backups.
Incremental backups, what does that mean?
So the first time it runs, it creates a full backup. But after that, it only copies the changes that were made since the last backup.
Oh, so it's not backing up the whole thing every time.
Exactly. That saves a ton of space, and it makes the whole process much faster.
That's really smart.
Yeah. And then for your retention policy, you can choose to keep your backups anywhere from a few days to years. It really depends on your compliance needs and how far back you might need to restore data from.
So some businesses might need to keep backups for a really long time.
Right. And the slide reminds us that it's important to make sure your retention policy lines up with any regulations that apply to you.
Right, you don't want to get in trouble.
No, you don't. And then the last thing on this slide is just a reminder that you really need to figure out your recovery objectives, your RTO and your RPO, before you finalize your backup schedule and retention policy.
Right, because those are going to determine how often you need to back up and how long you need to keep those backups.
Exactly. It all goes back to your business needs.
Okay, let's go to slide 7. Testing, monitoring, and cost management. These are all important parts of keeping your backups running smoothly, right?
Definitely. So slide 7 starts by talking about the importance of testing. You don't want to just assume that your backups are working.
Right.
You need to test them out and make sure you can actually restore your data if you need to.
It's like a fire drill. You have to practice so you're ready if there's a real emergency.
Exactly. And then the next part is monitoring and reporting. Azure gives you all these tools that let you see how your backups are doing, see the history of your jobs, and track your storage usage.
So you can keep an eye on everything and make sure it's working right.
Yeah. And if something goes wrong, you'll know about it right away.
That's good.
And then the last part is cost optimization.
Oh yeah, that's important. Cloud costs can get out of control.
They really can. But Azure has a bunch of different pricing tiers and options for backup storage, so you can find something that fits your budget.
So you can find a balance between keeping your data safe and keeping costs under control.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to slide 8, compliance and security considerations. These are really important topics, especially for sensitive data.
Definitely. So slide 8 starts off by talking about data encryption.
Okay.
Azure encrypts your backup data both when it's being stored and when it's being transferred over the network.
So nobody can snoop on your data.
Right. And then the next part is access control. You can use role-based access control, or RBAC, in Azure to control who has access to your backups.
So not just anyone can mess with your backups.
Yeah, only authorized people can get to them.
Makes sense.
And then there's also this thing called immutable backups.
Immutable backups.
Yeah, it basically means that once a backup is created, it can't be changed or deleted.
Oh, wow. That's good protection against ransomware.
Yeah, exactly. And it also protects against accidental deletions or changes.
So it's like a super safe backup.
Pretty much. And then finally, the slide mentions regulatory compliance again. Azure Backup is designed to help you meet those requirements, like GDPR and HIPAA, depending on what kind of data you have.
So it can help you stay on the right side of the law.
Exactly. Okay, so the last slide is slide 9.
Okay, let's go to slide 9, case study COSO's success with Azure Backup. I always like seeing real-world examples.
Yeah, me too. So this slide tells the story of a company called COSO.
Okay.
They were having problems with data loss, and it was taking them way too long to recover their data when something went wrong.
Oof. That's a bad situation.
Yeah, it was really hurting their business. So they decided to implement Azure Backup, and they came up with a really solid backup strategy.
Okay.
They defined their RTO and RPO, they set up their retention policy, and they created a schedule that worked for them.
And what happened?
Well, they saw some big improvements.
That's good.
Their data was more available, so they could access it when they needed it. They were able to recover much faster if something did go wrong, and they were able to meet all the compliance requirements for their industry.
That's a great success story. It really shows how important it is to have a good backup plan.
Yeah, it really does. So that's the end of the presentation.
Well, that was a really informative deep dive. So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways that you would want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that having a good backup strategy is absolutely essential for any business these days.
Absolutely.
It's not just something you can put off or ignore.
Yeah, you're right. It's got to be a top priority.
Exactly. And we talked about the 3 main components of a backup policy: recovery objectives, retention policy, and backup schedule. You need to think carefully about each of those and make sure they work together.
And we went over how to actually set up these policies in Azure and how to manage them over time.
Yeah, we talked about testing, monitoring, cost management, and the security and compliance aspects of backups.
All really important stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that case study about COSO really shows how much of a difference a good backup policy can make.
Yeah, they went from having a lot of problems to having everything under control.
Exactly. So as you're thinking about all of this, I would say the most important question to ask yourself is, have you really thought about your recovery objectives?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Do you know how much downtime you can handle and how much data loss is acceptable?
Because once you know the answers to those questions, you can start building a backup policy that will really protect your business.
Exactly.
Well, that was a fantastic deep dive. I think our listeners are going to find this super helpful.
I hope so. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.